This is an automatic license plate reader, or ALPR for short. This flock model has popped up recently in Pekin, just like they've been popping up all over the country. Today, we're going to be talking about the impact of ALPR cameras in our everyday life in the greater Peoria area. This is not to spread fear, but more so spread awareness about what data is being tracked from you every time you drive by. One of the reasons why ALPR cameras are popping up so quickly is because they're incredibly easy to install nearly anywhere. Take, for example, a light post like this one. If you look up, you're going to see that there is a solar panel providing power to the camera, and the more interesting part is a cellular modem that's actually communicating the data. There's no cable or wire that has to be run underground or stretch over power lines to reach this thing. You can install these cameras absolutely anywhere in only a couple hours. And boom, just like that, every car that drives by is being tracked. In this one intersection, there are 4 ALPR cameras. Why is that a big deal? That's because all the traffic you see behind me will be recorded regardless of the direction they go in. That's a lot of information to have constantly be collected. And just like every piece of technology, there's always the question about if it might become vulnerable and if bad actors will be able to have access to your information. Well, with these particular models of cameras, we know it's not a question of if, we know not if it's a question of when, but rather we know as a fact that these already have remote code execution vulnerabilities running live on these cameras. Now, what does that actually mean? Normally, to configure and access the hardware that's stuck to these poles, you have to physically take a cable and plug in. But not so much anymore. The vulnerabilities that these cameras shipped with and have been installed with are still running, meaning that using the cellular broadband modems inside the cameras, you could have people remotely access the feeds and remotely configure the devices. This is a massive vulnerability that's easy to overlook, but it's hidden in plain sight.
So how bad is it really that a lot of these ALPR cameras are running Android 8.0? Well, besides the fact that there's over 600 known vulnerabilities for that operating system that reached its end of life over 5 years ago, sometimes a real-world example is more helpful. This is my exercise bike, and it's running Android 9.0, a newer, more secure operating system, and it was still so grossly insecure that I was able to turn it into a Wii.
ALPR cameras don't just track your license plate. They also track for things like bumper stickers, the make, model, and color of your vehicle, as well as other accessories. So even if you think you're clever and decide to cut off your own license plate, it's not going to be enough. Those ALPR cameras will still be able to get you. And that's specifically from Flock. They want to target these unique identifiers so that way they can track who is a frequent visitor even when they make changes to their vehicle. Having all these additional criteria that these cameras search for takes more information than you probably realized by a license plate camera alone. This was a drive I took just earlier today, and together we're going to be spotting ALPR cameras. We should be seeing, ta-da, our first one just go by. And if we switch to the front cam, as we turn left, we'll be seeing our second ALPR only a few hundred feet away, if that. And we could use this website called dflock.org, which is a community-run project which helps map out where these cameras are and where they're posted all across the country. We'll know that as we travel along the front of the store here, we should be looking out for our third ALPR camera. These are so tightly packed together that you see that there's actually some overlap in the areas that they cover. Let's wait a few seconds while we're driving around to the fourth one, but it's critical to know that police departments aren't the only people that have to pay for these. These startup companies are more than willing to take orders from private companies such as this hardware store as well. So it could be the hardware store and local police departments both paying to install cameras, and ta-da! That's how we get 4 ALPR cameras in such a small, tight area when it's not really needed. So if there are all these potential vulnerabilities and issues with these cameras, why do police departments keep putting them in? Well, when you have this much information constantly getting gathered in real time, you can do a lot of actually useful things with it. The selling points could be, say for example, somebody steals a car. If they're in the middle of town and try to head out in any direction, there is a very high chance that an ALPR will catch them. Being able to have a timestamp that shows exactly where a vehicle was is incredibly useful information, as you could also figure out what direction of travel they were. As far as tracking down vehicles, it is a very useful tool, admittedly. But more importantly, what about the people inside those vehicles? Because every car has to be registered, and when you're reading a plate, you're reading more than just a random string of numbers, you're reading an identifier that can be tracked back to a particular person, it becomes really interesting when you look at high-risk cases. Say, for example, a murderer, a child predator, somebody that's committed a public threat. All these different cases could often be tracked back to somebody who has a registered license plate. That license plate could be run through the database, and in real time, you could figure out where their cars were last seen when it makes sense. This is a lot of information, and it's a big selling point on why police departments would want to implement this technology. I wish I could get a direct quote from the Pekin Police Department, but the officer I spoke to declined to comment publicly.